Good morning, everybody. This is Billy Trout with the Tennessee Department of Revenue's Taxpayer Education section. On behalf of our Commissioner, David Geragino, and our staff in Taxpayer Services and Revenue's Audit Division, we just wanted to thank you for joining us for today's presentation on obligated member entities. We're going to be going through quite a bit of technical material here this morning, and we hope that you've had the opportunity to either download the materials, or if you want to follow along, you're welcome to do that as we present the information going forward this morning. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce the rest of our folks that are on the webinar for this morning. And again, we will be recording this and it'll be posted to our website probably tomorrow. Okay, so with that, I want to introduce Mr. Dan Vinson, the Assistant Director of Taxpayer Services.
Hello, dear friends.
He is monitoring chat. Hi, Dan. And also with us today presenting is Miss Andrea Fields with Taxpayer Services Division for Franchise and Excise Tax. She is a Taxpayer Services Registration Auditor. And then also Mr. Sean Davis. So welcome to all of you guys as well. All right. So we'll go ahead and continue here and show you a couple of things. We'll be going through these slides to kind of let you know a little bit about this subject. The subject today is pretty technical. So if you're not here for franchise and excise tax purposes, and really as it pertains to obligated member entities, this may not be exactly what you're looking for, but you're most welcome to be here and learn a little bit more about this. So a couple of things as we before we get going here. Audio issues, hopefully you're hearing what I'm saying. If not, you can try leaving and coming back. And of course, like I said, we will be posting this to the website here too. Those of you that have signed up for CPE credits, you said that in your registration, you'll be sent a link to the survey at the end. And please complete the information on there, including your correct name. And we will get that emailed to you either later today or probably tomorrow. And then, of course, any specific questions that we don't get to in the webinar today, we want you to go ahead and let us know by calling us at our call center phone number. 615-253-0600 is our general number, and then franchise and excise tax hotline, which is probably a better choice for this subject. Same number, but it ends in 0700, 615-253-0700. Okay. All right. So as an overview about what we're going to be talking about here, today's topic is about the obligated member provisions of franchise and excise tax law. And of course, the whole idea behind this is that we're trying to get certain qualifying businesses to avoid duplication of taxation from the Tennessee franchise and excise tax. This could be quite a tax advantage for different entities out there, and you want to take advantage of everything you can when you can to save tax money, as you would for federal taxes or any other taxes or whatever. So we'll start off here in just a moment about talking about why applying for this status is so important in a little more detail. We'll talk about which entities qualify for the election. Not every entity type does qualify, but some do. And then how to maintain that election in subsequent years, which is quite important as well. And then how does it really affect the way you file a franchise and excise tax return? And of course, the registration and renewal processes. And then we'll follow that up at the end with a list of some resources that you can use for any type of future interaction that you might need. Okay. All right. And Sean and Andrea, are you available and on here? There you go. I just want to make sure you guys are on there.
Yep.
All right. We're going to keep on going. And here we go. So the purpose of this OME election, it's to obtain a pass-through tax treatment. And like it says here in that first bullet point, it effectively exempts the entity and members from taxation at the entity level, but the parent entity is going to be subject to the tax. Okay. Again, avoiding the duplication of taxation. That's what you're after on that. And of course, importantly here, it says all members must make the election. So if one or more members doesn't make the election, then it's not a valid OME election, obligated member entity election. Okay.
Okay.
So very important that you understand that too. And then, of course, if one or more of the members doesn't elect the exemption, the other members can't assume an exemption on a proportional basis or a prorated basis. So you're either all in or you're all out. And that is pretty clear in Tennessee's law on that. All right. So Tennessee Code Annotated 67-4-2008 has the provisions for the obligated member entity qualifications. And as we mentioned earlier, it only applies to certain types of entities. And it says here that entities must be an LLC, an LP, or an LLP. So notice that there's some other types of entities that are not included here. So it has to be one of these types on that. Now, and we're going to talk about this in great detail in just a few minutes, but of course, you do have to file appropriate documentation with the Tennessee Secretary of State also prior to the first day of the taxable year for which the return is filed. And this must be submitted to us here at the Department of Revenue with the application for exemption. So we'll probably talk about this in just a little while longer, or in just a little bit rather. So we want to be sure that you understand that there's an obligation over at the Secretary of State as well prior to your application with us for OME. An obligated member entity whose direct and indirect owners are individuals or entities that don't offer limited liability protection, like general partnerships or sole proprietorships, will be fully exempt from the franchise and excise tax. And and also the last section here says an obligated member entity that has one or more direct or indirect owners that provides limited liability protection like corporations, LLCs, or LPs will only be partially exempt from the tax. And I was going to ask Andrea or Sean if they had any comments about any of that right there. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yes. So, in reference to the OME exemption, it is very important that you register your entity first with Tennessee's Secretary of State as an obligated member, making the election with their office prior to submitting the application to the Department of Revenue. And as far as the partial OME exemption, I think we touched on it briefly just a moment ago, but all members typically should be all members of the obligated member exemption, meaning that they waive their limited liability protection. And for any entity that did not, or any member that did not waive the liability, may be subject still to the F&E tax, which will result in the partial OME exemption.
Okay, that's great. All right, thank you for adding that. I appreciate
Mhm.
that.
Absolutely.
All right. So, like Andrea said, registration is very important. You do need to file an application, and of course, this is everything in the government has a number. So, our application number is called FAA 183. It is on our website as well, but we can also do that online, right, Andrea?
Yes.
Okay, and we're going to talk about something very important about that in just a few minutes as well, too. And then, of course, like we just mentioned a second ago, you've got to attach the documentation that's been filed with the Secretary of State. That's important. So there's a process that you have to go through before you actually submit that application to us. And if the entity doesn't meet the exemption requirements in the given year, it is taxable for that year. So that's why it's so important to get this right. And then timing is important here too. So let's look at what this says. It says a completed franchise and excise tax return would have to be filed with payment of any taxes due by the 15th day of the fourth month, typically April 15th for calendar year filers, following the close of the tax year if you do not have the exemption. So you want to make sure to have that. Absolutely. Okay. Sean or Andre, anything to register on or to mention about registration? Excuse me.
Um, I guess one thing for registrations department, if you're unable to attach the OME amendments to your application, we do have a way to request those from Secretary of State. However, it does speed up the process if you do attach them to your application. But in the event that you can't, please don't stress. We can still pull them from the Secretary of State's website.
That's good to know too. And of course, we've in the tax business here this time of year, especially as we record this in April or almost April anyway, see into March. We're getting towards that pinch time. So
Yes.
things are important. Anything you can do to help streamline that process aids us in being able to get to not only your inquiry, but other inquiries as well that we get this time of year. Okay. All right. So if you get the approval for OME, you also want to renew that requirement as long as you meet all the obligations and have the same sort of registration situation. And that same form that we mentioned a few minutes ago, that FAE 183 form, is the same way that you apply for the renewal as well. And then, of course, it has to be filed by the 15th day of the fourth month. Ring a bell. We just mentioned that a second ago, right? And then, of course, entities requesting an extension for federal income tax are automatically granted an extension. So this applies to the 183 as well. Is that correct?
It is. I think on the next slide is going to discuss the checkbox where they will need
Ah,
to
yes.
check that box, just indicating they do have a federal extension.
Right, right. I'm remembering that now.
Mm.
So, and of course, we have to have that every year. So if we
Right.
don't get it, you're not going to be exempt, and which means you're going to file a tax return and pay tax. So we don't want to do that. Now, in red at the bottom of this slide, it says use 10 tap to more quickly complete your application or renewal. So we would definitely want to push that. The quicker we can get to your application as well as others, is better for everybody. So again, we don't want to be drowning in work. We want to be able to efficiently push your paperwork through. And that goes for any of the taxes that we do, but especially for franchise and excise tax, which has a, I guess you could say, a different level of complexity that some of the other taxes don't have. So anyway, there you go. All right.
Can I add just one more thing
Oh,
to that
please do.
that one?
Thank you.
So, in reference to the renewal, it is very important that you maintain your OME registration status with Secretary of State. So when you're filing your annual reports every year, just make sure that that registration does not change. If you're adding members or removing members, just make sure that they are all still electing to be an obligated member. That way, when your renewal is submitted to our office, your status is still reflective as an OME exempt entity, and we can process and approve your renewal.
And Andrea, I know a lot of companies change business structures and do all kinds of mergers and
Yes,
things like that through the year. So what you're saying there is really important because, if you're doing that kind of thing, there's a cause and effect that's essentially happening, right?
exactly.
Okay. All right. That makes sense to me too. Very good. All right. Okay, so some specifics about the certification process as it relates to the different kinds of qualifying entities. For limited partnerships, it says that each limited partner must sign the certificate of limited partnership or an amendment to the certificate that contains this provision and must be notarized as well. For LLPs, limited liability partnerships, it says basically that signature requirement is there for the or amendment, again, with the notarization as well. LLCs, each member so identified must sign the articles or an amendment, again, containing this provision, and that it may provide that it is only effective if all members make and maintain such an election. So that goes back to what we were talking about before about how you're either all in or you're not. So
Mhm.
that's very important too. In any such cases, the articles must identify each member and state that such persons constitute all the members of the LLC when you're talking about LLCs. Okay. So again, documentation is so super important. Okay, and this is what Andrew was talking about before. Okay, so if you're filing for an extension, make sure that either on the physical form or on TINTAP that you are indicating that you have filed for the extension. That way we can give you credit for that, so that we don't consider you late and ineligible for the extension. Does that sound right to you guys?
It does,
Yes,
yes.
sir.
Okay, very good. Very good. Thank you so much. That was a pretty easy slide. All right. So we'll talk about our resources. There's not a whole lot of different resources about this topic. We mentioned the form, and it is on our website. You're welcome to pull that form and look at it. And we can show you a few things on the website here in a few minutes if you'd like. But our franchise and excise tax manual is fantastic. So if you are a person that loves taxes, or perhaps you need something late at night to help you get a little more sleepy and you want to read 200 or 300 pages worth of tax stuff, you might pull up the franchise and excise tax manual because it has loads and loads of information in there. And honestly, it's a great resource, as are our other manuals. We feel real strongly that we need to communicate with our taxpayers, our commissioner and his staff, and all of us that work in our different departments are really dedicated to making sure you have great information. So the franchise and excise tax manual is exactly what that is. Okay. And I know that people like myself and Andrea and Sean and anybody on this call that's with revenue, we're in the manuals all day long. Does that sound right?
Yes, all
Yeah, I
day.
just want to second that. Yeah, the manual is kind of our Bible here in F&E. So it's answers almost any question you can think of.
Yeah, it's tremendous in that manner. Sure is. And yeah, we hope you can take advantage of that as you need to. So now we'll talk about a few questions here. What I'm going to do while we're talking about a few issues that you guys had in some of your registration is I'll open up the chat and we'll try to answer some of your questions that you may have in chat as well. So, so we'll go ahead and do that. But I want to go ahead and ask Sean and Andrea this first question that came up. It said, "How should I register for OME when a business started in the middle of a year?"
Yeah, I can take that one. Well, so from the department's perspective, uh, the only limiting factor is they have to have made that obligate. They made the election to be an obligated member entity on or before the first day of their taxable period. So even if that is in the middle of a tax year, middle of a month, it doesn't matter. It worked the same way. So they just have to make sure that they make that election prior to the beginning of their first tax period, regardless of when that period starts.
Right.
Okay, is that a
Yeah.
challenge for you, Andrea, when that happens? What happens
Um,
with us?
Usually it's not a challenge if the entity doesn't qualify based on the OME effective date, that the stamp date that's on your amendments. The exemption just gets rolled to the following year. So for example, they didn't qualify for 2025 because it was a middle of the year registration, they will automatically qualify for 2026, and we will approve the exemption for 2026. It's not a denial letter for 25.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Another question that some people had before when they were registering is, what are the requirements for tiered entities and foreign tiered entities? You want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So Tennessee is a separate entity filing state. Each entity is evaluated on its own separate entity activity, regardless of whether it's a tiered entity, subsidiary, a parent. It doesn't matter. So really, the OME applies to any eligible entity type on a separate entity basis, regardless of the ownership structure. So really, it's the same, works the same way for a tiered entity as it would for any other entity.
Okay. All right. Very good. And let's hit another question here. There were several questions, and let's see. How would an entity indicate to us at the Department of Revenue that it's included in a parent company's return? How does that actually work?
Yeah, so just recently, I think with the 2024 or 2025 version of the FAE 170 return, which is filed by entities that are not exempt, there's a new schedule. It's called Schedule I, where they should list any disregarded entities that are included in that return. I know that kind of contradicts what I said earlier, but there is an exception, of course. So if you have an LLC whose single member is a corporation or files federally as a corporation, then that LLC is considered a division of the parent for Tennessee F&E purposes, and the corporation would be the filer. So the corporation would file the return, include its own activity and the single member LLC's activity, and they would show the single member LLC there on Schedule I.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Very
Uh,
good.
Just want to add on to that one. So that is slightly well, that is different from the OME exemption. What Sean is referring to is a
Yes.
single member LLC disregarded entity, which is a form of an exemption, but it's not the same as the OME exemption. Okay.
Yeah, good point, Andrea.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So how does OME apply to these part year pass-through members?
Well, so I don't think that an OME would ever apply to an entity that is a single member LLC and is disregarded to a corporation for F&E purposes. Because from the department's perspective, it's really just the corporation that's the filer, and that LLC is just a division of that parent filer. And corporations cannot make the OME election at all. So you really would never run into that situation.
Okay. That could be a little
Oh,
tricky to understand.
Yeah. I
Um,
could say that again a little slower if needed, but yeah, it definitely is tricky.
Right. I think what Sean is trying to explain is that a corporation doesn't have the ability to elect to be an obligated member entity. So therefore, if it was the parent company or filing on behalf of a single member LLC, they wouldn't necessarily encounter the situation of being an obligated member and the single member LLC being exempt because the corporation does not have the ability to elect to be OME exempt. So typically, the corporation would file an F&E return and the single member LLC would be disregarded, meaning that it does not have a filing requirement because it's disregarded. But again, that is separate from the OME election or the OME exemption.
okay. Okay. Is there anything else that you guys want to bring up at this point to let our folks know about that we haven't covered? I know there was a few other questions, and I didn't know if we had sort of stepped on that or not.
So I just want to just reiterate the effective date. With the obligated member, I know we've discussed this a few times now, but the effective date being on or before the first day of the taxable year is very important. We do receive several calls from taxpayers who've received denial letters for that reason, and it just has to be that it's on or before the first day of the taxable year of the requested tax year. So if you're requesting to be OME exempt for tax year 2025, the effective date of your OME stamped amendments must be either before January 1st or on or before January 1st of 2025 to qualify. If not, it will roll to the subsequent year, which will be 2026, and we will automatically approve your exemption for 2026 and send you a denial letter for 2025.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
Gotcha.
a big confusion sometimes
Yeah.
with processing the
Yeah,
exemptions.
exactly. Exactly. I wanted to show you a couple of things on the website here. First of all, for those of you that may not be as familiar with the website as others, we made some allusions to different things that we have out here, and some of you probably saw this when you registered for the webinar. But under tax resources here, if you can see my screen, you guys can see my screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we see tax guidance here. And then if we look here for tax manuals, this is what we were talking about. Here's the franchise and excise tax manual. And we can see here that we have loads of pages. Look at that, the table of contents. I told you it was hundreds, right? Keep going. How many?
It's a good read.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are we in the 400s now? How far can we go, guys? Come on, 500. Yes, 531. All right, so far. the legislature's in session right now. It could be longer for the next time. So that things happen. By the way, we do update these manuals a couple of times a year, especially after the legislative session. So we'll be getting that. We'll be definitely getting that as far as that goes. All the updates. All right. But yeah, we're not going to go through this manual because that would be brutal. So we're not going to do that. But yeah, we've got the forms, that are out here, tax specific forms. We're looking for franchise and excise tax. When you apply to get your franchise and excise tax account, you do that here. You can get the form. We ask that you really do that on 10-tap. That's the best way to do it. That's our electronic filing and payment system and tax record system. That's the best way to do any of this stuff here too. But all the different application forms that we have here are listed by categories, and we won't go through all that, but you can find that 183 form in there as well. But again, we're real proud of our website. We'll be talking here in just a moment how to get more help, revenue help. Since we're out here, I'll just show you. You can type in, let's see, obligated member. All right, let's see what happens here. Look, here's a bunch of questions, that already have answers about different things, some of which match exactly and some don't. Then we've got the ability for you to submit a request. So this is how you can send us a question that we're not going to be able to maybe get to today. We'll be able to cover that this way by you actually providing a question for us. So I'll stop sharing my screen right now and we'll go back into this. So yeah, I'm seeing some things come up in chat. What have you guys seen? Anything on that hit your fancy there, Sean
I
or Andrea?
I didn't see anything in the
Um,
everyone chat, but I didn't realize there's a direct tab there.
Okay.
Got quite a few.
All right. Take a look there and see what you see.
I think my chat is maybe in delay, but I'm not seeing any questions here.
Okay.
Okay, I've got one from Kate. Kate
All
said,
right.
"What if we have a single member LLCs that do not have any activity in Tennessee? Do they still need to be registered with the SOS to be included in an OME election? This question pertains to single member LLCs owned by an LP." So, Kate, it sounds like if the single member LLC it's owned by an LP, so therefore it's not disregarded for Tennessee purposes because it's not owned by a corporation. That single member LLC would not have a filing requirement at all. They would not have nexus in Tennessee if they don't have any activity. Um, Except if they are registered with the SOS, if then that gives them nexus and they have to file a minimum return. So if they don't have any need to register with the SOS, I don't recommend doing that. But yeah, let me know if that doesn't answer your question.
Mhm. Yeah, I've
Okay.
got a question here from Randy asking, does the election affect the protection of the LLC? Yes, it does. If you're electing to be an obligated exempt entity, essentially you're waiving your limited liability protection and that you are going to be solely liable for all debts and liabilities of the entity. So yes, it does. It's affect the protection of the LLC. You're essentially waiving your protection.
Yeah, and to tack on to that, the franchise and excise tax is specifically targeted at entities that offer limited liability protection, which is why you don't see a general partnership, for example, needing to file an F&E return. So this is essentially a limited liability entity where the owners have said we're fully liable for the debts and obligations of this entity. So from Tennessee's perspective, it's not really a limited liability entity anymore. That's why the exemption exists. But yeah, they do lose out on that liability shield.
And you guys may have touched on this. Juanita was asking if we can clarify if a single member LLC can qualify for the exemption. But I'm sorry if you already answered that, but would you mind repeating that again?
Yeah, a single member LLC can absolutely qualify for the exemption. It's just, I think in the example earlier, it sounded like that single member LLC didn't really have a filing requirement to begin with. No nexus in Tennessee. But say you do have a single member LLC that has nexus in Tennessee and would otherwise have to file the typical FAE 170 return. If the members of that or the member of that LLC, um, elects to be an obligated member, then yes, that LLC could be exempt.
Right. Right. And we also, excuse me, understand that some of the complexities of registration and different things that people set up, maybe even series LLCs and some other stuff that's sort of unusual happens. Send us an email about that and let us dig a little further on that. Folks like Andrea and other folks in franchise and excise tax in our office can kind of drill down into that and get more specific with you. It's they're very complex at different times, that's for sure.
Mhm. Yeah. There's a question here from Chris Bryant. Want to know when do you renew every year? So your renewal is due by the end of your fiscal year end, the 4 months and 15 days. Of course, if your fiscal year end is December, that will be April 15th is when your exemption renewal is due, unless you filed a federal extension. You do have until the federal extension due date. But just keep in mind April 15th if it's a December fiscal year end filer or 4 months and 15 days past the fiscal year end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Timing is very important.
right.
Yes.
The renewal is essentially due on the same day that the tax return would have been due.
Hmm.
Yes. Yes. Also, one thing I want to bring up now, it's based on an important notice that we just put out yesterday on our website, is about postmarking. And this has nothing to do particularly with this particular topic, but since we're talking about dates and things like that, some of you may be aware that the U.S. Post Office now postmarks um, items that you send through the regular mail based on when the postmarked item or when the item comes to a postal facility that does the postmarking. So that doesn't necessarily mean that, like in the old days, so to speak, that the postmark date is going to be the date that you put it in the your post box, your mailbox rather, right? It also doesn't necessarily mean that they'll postmark it the day that you take it to the post office. Okay. So, what we attempted to put out in this notice is notification saying just understand that the post office works differently and that your item might get postmarked a day or two even after you think it might. So that's why it's critically important to make sure that things are sent in on time. Now, we will look at things on a case by case basis to try to help taxpayers that may be caught in that jam. But where you can avoid that is by being extra vigilant in making sure that you are submitting your paperwork well in advance of any of these due dates. Okay. Not preaching at you. I'm just telling you it's different than it used to be. And I've done this for a long time, and we depend on postmarks so much. And now that this is a little bit different, it's kind of weird. And that's why we put out the important notice, because it's so important. Okay. Other questions, guys? What are you seeing there?
There's a question here from Finney. It says, what about an established LLC as a sole proprietor? Can we benefit for the 2024, I'm sorry, 2025, or will we need to wait until 2026? Again, this goes back to the OME election or status being registered as Secretary of State on or before the first day of the taxable year. So if you have not already registered with Secretary of State by January 1st of 2025, you would not qualify for tax year 2025, and that'll be the same for 2026. If you were to register today with Secretary of State as an OME exempt entity, your application would be approved for 2027. It has to be on or before the first day of the taxable year.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Okay. Well, I think we've done a good job of going through these. Any other questions that we need to get to at this particular point? I think we've covered most of this.
Oh, we do have a few more. I don't know how much more time we have for
Yeah, we do have a
questions.
little more time, Sean. Go
Okay.
ahead and
Yeah,
we'll address what we can.
I'm afraid they're in alphabetical order, so I'm not sure which ones came in first,
Right.
but I'm just starting from the top. Okay, so Bobby Joe Lazarus asks, are you planning a training for the exemption? VC exemption,
Venture
venture
capital.
capital? Billy, I don't know. Yeah.
I don't have one on the calendar yet, but we might have that in the future. So stay tuned.
Okay, and then
Yeah, there's always stuff to do. There's no question about it.
Mhm.
Bobby also asked, is there required language in the operating agreement or LPA? Um, I do not know what the required, what the specific language would be, um, you know, to say that a member is obligated for the debts and liabilities. I I've never been involved with that step of the process, so I'm not exactly sure. I think the Tennessee Secretary of State would be able to help with that, though.
Yes, I'm actually on the obligated member amendments that come from Secretary of State. It does clearly identify the members that are electing to waive their limited liability protection, and it does list their name, is the printed name, signed name, and it has a whole paragraph that basically just goes over what we just discussed, that you're waiving your limited liability protection, and you would be liable for all debts and liabilities assessed for the business.
So that's sort of in the standard format, right?
It is, and it comes to
Okay,
Secretary of
that's good to
State.
know.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Andrea. So next we got Gary. Gary said, "Can you clarify the loss of liability protection? Is that only with respects to Tennessee tax obligations?" And no, no. In these cases, typically an LLC, um, the owners or members of that LLC are only liable to the extent that they put into the LLC. Their personal assets are protected. Um, but if they make, this election to be fully liable for all debts and obligations of the LLC, then that applies across the board. Even beyond just Tennessee taxes. We're just saying if they do that, then we would exempt them for Tennessee purposes from F&E because the entity no longer offers limited liability protection.
Okay. All right. These are great questions.
Okay.
Let's see. We have another person that asked if a single member acting as an S corporation can qualify. How does that quote S corporation status enter into this conversation, guys?
Well, so I definitely recommend reading the section in the F&E manual about partial exemptions because it covers some good examples on this. But essentially, if the parent or the member is a type of entity that offers limited liability protection, such as an S corporation, then even if they make the election to be fully liable for the the LLC's debts and obligations, that LLC would still not be considered exempt for F&E purposes. They can only be exempt to the extent that the members or owners do not themselves offer limited liability protection.
Okay.
And it gets confusing quick. So I definitely recommend anyone who has questions about that,
Viewing.
check out the manual. Yeah, it's pretty well explained there.
Right, right.
Okay. I noticed Wendy asked a question about the initial Form 183. She's saying that it needs to be filed by 12/31 of a tax year. I guess she's assuming that it's a calendar tax year, but the annual renewal must be by 4/15. Which is it? Is it 4/15 or for a calendar year taxpayer? Or
It
is
is
it
that,
the,
well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
the due date would be by 4/15, but they can submit the application to us as early as January 1 of that year.
Okay, so it's really not 12/31 like she
Right, no,
was
not for,
thinking.
we
It's
we will not process, we
okay.
will send you a denial letter if you
Right.
submit
I
it
was I
before.
was remembering that from the
Yeah,
slides. Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Yeah, we're glad to clarify that, Wendy. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is really good, guys. Anything else you guys want to touch on here?
Seeing about 5 more questions if you want to jump into those, Billy.
Yeah, go ahead and pick a couple more.
All right, yeah. So Juanita asked, will you clarify if a single LLC can file for exemption? Um, I think Juanita means a single member LLC. And yes, if its member makes the election to be fully obligated for fully liable for the debts and obligations of that single member LLC, then yes, the single member LLC can be exempt as an obligated member entity. But again, if the parent entity itself, whoever that member is, offers its own limited liability protection, then no, the LLC would not be exempt.
Okay.
Right.
What else can we address with these kind folks this morning?
Let's see. So got one from Lovey. Can a single member acting as an S corp qualify? I think no, if I'm understanding the question, because corporations in general cannot qualify for the OME election. So if that's what you mean, then no, that S corp cannot qualify. If you mean it's an LLC and the single member is an S corp, then for Tennessee purposes, that LLC doesn't have its own filing requirement anyways. It would be disregarded to the S corp for F&E purposes, and again, the S corp still couldn't make the election. Let me know if that doesn't answer your question. I'm sorry, that was kind of vague, I know.
Yeah, that's understood. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I neglected to do something earlier that I want to go ahead and do right now. Mr. Jeremy Kane, can you pop on here real quick? You're online with us, I believe.
Hey, good morning, Billy.
How you doing there, Jeremy? Jeremy Kane is a new member of our education team, and we just wanted to say welcome to him. He's going to be helping with webinars, and he has a really terrible boss. Yeah, that's me. But anyway, he'll get through it. But anyway, we're so glad to have Jeremy on board, and he'll be here to help with webinars and do all kinds of great stuff for us in the future. So welcome, Jeremy. Thank you again. I'm sorry I missed you up front. That's my fault.
That's no problem. Thank you and enjoy
Okay.
being here.
Thank you, sir. All right. So just to let you know, we do have all of the different social medias here that you see. For whatever reason on this slide, the email address that I'm seeing isn't showing up. So let me just type in that email address into chat here real quick. It's revenue.support@tn.gov. I'm not sure why it does that. Weird. Anyway, there you go. That's in chat. That's how you send emails to us. And we're glad to answer any questions that you guys might have relative to the topic today or really anything relating to state taxes. You see our call center phone number 615-253-0600. And also for franchise and excise tax, it says registration, but it's franchise and excise tax. It's 615-253-0700. Okay. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And I want to thank Sean and Andrea, Jeremy, Dan, and all of you for attending the webinar today. And as we said, we'll have this webinar posted to our website either later today or probably tomorrow. And if you have any ability to join us for any of our upcoming webinars, here they are. We have sales tax exemptions coming up in April, and then a fun one on auctioneers in May. And any of you that might be helping businesses who are new businesses, or you might be a new business person, if you want to join us for the new business workshop here next week, we'd be glad to have you on board. We'll go through some very basics of taxes with these folks, and we do this quarterly. So we're always glad to have folks join us. So with that, we'll go ahead and remind you to take that survey as you exit today. And thanks again for everybody's participation, and hope everybody has a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Thank you all.